So when we're working in Illustrator, as you know, you just have to begin with a fill and a stroke setting on any path. You can make the fill none, you can make the stroke none. And we've also, mostly been working in the properties panel. And in this little area right here, this is kind of like a mini appearance panel. So we see fill, stroke, and then there's opacity. So you can even take this object and make it dim like this, and you can add a blending mode to it and that sort of thing. And then here's where we can add effects. So this is kind of like a mini appearance panel, but I'm going to go over here and open up the actual appearance panel, which is a part of the workspace that we set up in chapter 3. So I'm just going to open the appearance panel here and just kind of draw an analogy between the appearance panel and the layers panel. So, as you know, in Illustrator, layers, anything you draw, let's get that. Anything you draw, you can just draw and continuously stack up. One thing stacks up on another. And, after you draw a bunch of objects, eventually you're going to want to go into the layers panel, divide your art up onto layers, and that's going to make it easier for you to work in Illustrator. It's just a more efficient way to work, even though you could ignore the layers panel altogether and just let everything just sort of stack up one on top of the other. Well, in the appearance panel, the appearance panel is almost like having a layers panel for an individual path. Appearances can also be applied to groups and to layers, but we're not really going to go too far down into that. So if we look here at this appearance, this oval that we have, in the appearance panel, we can see at the top it says it's a path, and it's got a stroke on it and a fill on it and the opacity setting. So just like what we saw in the properties panel. But this is just the default. If I want to, because this is like a mini layers panel for this one path, I can actually take that fill and drag it up above the stroke. And you see now that fill is obscuring part of that stroke. So the default in Illustrator, anytime you draw, is that stroke goes above fill. But in the appearance panel, you actually have control over that. So here I'm just going and with this selected object, just dragging like that to move these around. The next thing that you notice about the appearance panel here is that here's the opacity setting. And if I come over here and select it, and by the way, you can see what's selected, it just turns blue like that. So unlike the layers panel, we don't have any little doodads over here that we can select. So just the whole level of that attribute turns blue. And so I've selected opacity. And like I showed you before, you can just, change an opacity setting there, just like we did in the properties panel. And I can use these little eyeballs here, icons, just like we do in the layers panel to say, oh, what does this look like without that opacity setting? Oh, let's turn the opacity setting back on. And in this case, the opacity setting is applying to the fill and the stroke, the whole object. But look at this. If I turn down these little triangles here, there is an opacity setting for the stroke, and there's also an opacity setting for the fill. So we have, unbeknownst to us as we're drawing away in Illustrator, we actually, any path that you have has potentially 3 opacity settings always there, ready to be changed. So let's go ahead. I'm going to take this one right here and click on that link and just drag this right back up. You can see when I drag it up to 100, it turns back, the word default appears again. So default is 100% opacity, but I can come in here to the fill and give it an opacity setting like that. Now we can see that the fill is 43%. And let me just go ahead and take this fill and drag it back up to the top here. And now we can see even how that fill is overlapping the stroke. So it's really amazing the things that you can do with this, for one thing, the creative things that you could do with this. But Another side of the appearance panel is that you kind of have to be careful about what you have selected at any given time, because it really does matter here. And sometimes you might not see it, or you might not know what's going on. So if I have all of these triangles closed and I'm just starting afresh with this file and I click on this, I might not really understand what's going on here. I see that there's a green fill and a blue stroke, but I'm not sure why that's transparent. If this is something I'm not familiar with, then it's good to come into the appearance panel and look over here and maybe turn these triangles down and see what's going on and say, oh, okay, yeah, that's an opacity setting on that fill. And the fill is on top of the stroke. Okay, that's really different. Now, let's say I want to just get rid of this opacity setting here. So let me go ahead and just delete that. If I delete this opacity setting, it's going to go back to default. It's just going to turn it back to 100% opaque because these never move. It's either default or something. Let me go to the next thing that I wanted to show you and put a drop shadow on. First of all, I'm going to move the fill underneath the stroke. So we're kind of back to normal. Another way of doing that is to go up here to the options menu and, go back to a basic appearance. And I'll show you a little bit about that in a minute. But here's a really common thing that you may want to do is in Illustrator is, let's go ahead and close those. And we're starting from this fill and stroke here, and I want to add a drop shadow. So let me go ahead and click on here and go to Stylize and then Drop Shadow. All right, so what that does is it opens up this panel with some settings in it here. At the top, I have a blending mode. By default, it's usually set to multiply, so I'm going to put that back to multiply. And then you have the X and Y offset here. So if I put my cursor in here and I just use my arrow keys, I can change how far away that is or how close it is on the X-axis. Same here, I can go down to the Y-axis and move this around. Let's move that down a little bit, like that. And then the blur setting, a lot like Photoshop, you can just kind of decide how diffuse you want to make it. And you can actually go all the way to making it really totally sharp with no blur on it, like that. And then here, we can change the color. So if I just click on that little square there, I can change this to red. And if this was, let's click OK. If this was over something, you would see how, let me move it to the top. You would see how it affects the things below it, like this other ellipse there. So when you have an effect, we can drag this drop shadow around. Let me go back. I'm going to go and click on this link here. This is how you edit any of these properties. Just click there. And then I want to change this back to black because that's going to be easier for us to see and evaluate. All right. And then I'll click OK. And now let's say I want to drag this drop shadow and put it on the stroke. And look at, as I drag it, it's highlighting and I'm letting go. And now I've added the drop shadow to the stroke. And if I turn this down, we can see there it is right there on the stroke. Or if I drag it down here, I can drag it to the fill. And now it's a little bit, behind there. And then I can come here and take that drop shadow and drag it all the way down below the fill and add it to the whole object, the whole path. So it's just an important distinction to make that now that we're talking about affecting individual strokes and fills with effects like this, the stacking order matters, where you drag and drop things matters. And so that's something to be kind of just aware of as you're using the appearance panel. All right, so here we are with our stroke and our fill and our drop shadow applied. One great thing about this is once you are working here in the appearance panel, then let's say I really like the way I've set this up. Well, I can save this appearance as a graphic style. So graphic styles, the graphic styles panel is right behind the appearance panel. If you don't have it, it is in our workspace that we set up in chapter 3, but you can always go to the window menu and open up the graphic styles panel there. But what this is it's a place for saving appearances. So I'll just go ahead and with this selected, I can click on the plus sign, and now I've got a saved appearance there, graphic style. And then I can come over here and just apply it by clicking on it like that. So it just replaces the appearance of that pattern filled object and now makes it identical to this one. All right, let me undo that. So that's basics of what graphic styles do. One thing that I wanted to show you here is sort of another kind of a pitfall of working, well, a plus and a minus, I guess, is like, let's say we have a pattern fill here, and you can see this pattern fill has, it looks like a white background, but let me move it on top here. It's actually a clear background. You can see through it. The great thing about this is that when you create a pattern fill that has a clear background, then you can add any solid color behind it. You can do this in the appearance panel. So I've got this little oval here, and to add a fill in the appearance panel, you want to select whatever it is that you want to add the fill on top of, and then click the Add New Fill button. You do the same thing if you were adding a stroke. So let me go ahead and tap on that. And so I've added another fill. It's identical, same pattern like that. And then I just want to choose the lower fill and click on this arrow to open up the little swatches panel there and just add a color behind it. And this is great because I can come in here and just be clicking away and looking for different options here. You can use this when you have pattern fills applied to things with solid fills behind them. It works in recolor artwork and everything. So it's kind of just an efficient way to work. And then you can also save this as a graphic style, and you can apply it to other paths in your file. So this is a great technique, and it's something that I talk about in Pattern Power, and I use this a lot. But it's important to be kind of aware that once we're stacking up multiple fills here, then we really do have to open up the appearance panel and check it out to see what's going on at any given time. The reason is because, like, here's this object here and I'm selecting it. And let's say I've done this many times where I go over into the swatches panel and I've got a whole bunch of pattern fill swatches here. And I'm like, which one is it? If you create patterns and you're creating these little iterations of them that are almost the same, and these thumbnails are so small that you can't tell the difference between them. You're like, I want to know which one it is. Why isn't it highlighting here? Well, that's because currently that pattern fill, that top fill, is not active. Actually, the lower fill, the green fill, is active, and it's showing up right here. And so if you don't know that you're looking for that, it can kind of throw you off a little bit here. But there is a warning that helps us with this, and it's right up here on the top control bar. See this little, next to the fill and stroke icons is a little tiny, a triangle with an exclamation point in it. And so that, you just click on it, and it's telling us in the tooltip, topmost fill stroke is not active. Click here to make it active. There we go. So now if I'm, I can see that the fill is there. And if I go over into the swatches panel, there's my pattern fill highlighted there. So it's just something to be aware of, that you can actually have an object selected and not have the proper fill selected and wind up, changing it in a way that you don't intend to. So it's just good to be aware of that. As long as you know about those things, it's really great to work in the appearance panel. So I've selected this, and I'm selecting the drop shadow. The first time I selected it, I did not see that trash icon there. Now it's appeared. So I want to get rid of this drop shadow. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. And it said there was a graphic style there. Now I'm just sort of back to a plain appearance. All right. So what I want to do is kind of now show you the difference between basic and complex appearances, now that we kind of know a little bit about this. And It's confusing to me many times. Oh, great, Jennifer, I'm glad it's clear. Okay, yes, it can get confusing, but it's really sort of the key to some good things in Illustrator. All right, so what we have here is just, a diagram of complex and basic appearances. All right, so basic appearances here on the right, complex on the left, and I'm using the word complex and basic not because that's what I think these are. This is what Illustrator calls them. So I want to use the terminology so that when you see it further on down the line, you'll know what that means. Right here's a width profile. Now we worked with these in chapter 5, especially in that exercise where we were tracing the grammar of ornament with the curvature tool. And there's this setting that you have to have selected. New art has basic appearance. And I'll show you that. But what I'm saying here basically is that, we use brushstrokes and width profiles all the time in Illustrator. I wouldn't necessarily call that complex. We use transparency all the time in Illustrator. It doesn't strike me as complex, but this is in the category of complex appearances. Drop shadows, any kind of an effect, multiple fills and strokes. A lot of what I was just doing there with this circle, all of these fall into this category of complex. And I'll show you why that matters. But like, for example, with our width profile, and I'll get out the curvature tool and just start a new line. So we already did some of this before. I'm drawing with that line. As long as you have something selected, whatever its appearance is, you're usually able to just continuously draw with that appearance. But there's this setting, and this is something I tell you about in that curvature tool exercise, that is right here. New art has basic appearance. By default, this should be unchecked, but I've checked it now. So you can see there, it's turned on. So what this means is, even though, now if I was just drawing with this width profile, the next thing that I draw is going to have just a plain uniform stroke. So that's why it's good to know what a basic appearance and a complex appearance is because, if you're drawing with the pencil tool and you're like, why can't I keep drawing with this width profile? It's because of this setting right here. It's because the width profile is what Illustrator thinks of as a complex appearance. And this setting just happens to be on. And this trips people up a lot. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn that back on. And now when I select the width profile, the next thing that I draw should have that width profile applied to it. So that's why I just wanted to tell you what, the terminology is here. There's another reason for that terminology. Let me go ahead and let's look at these appearances inside of the layers panel. So here we are. In this file, I have my type on one layer just so I wouldn't disturb it by moving around. And then I have my basic appearances here and my complex appearance examples here. Now I'll just turn these triangles down. And notice that under the basic, let's see, what is this one right here? What did I do here? I somehow made that. I think I've been playing around with this so much that it's no longer a basic appearance. So let me go ahead and reduce it to a basic appearance just because I want this to look the way I want it to look. All right, looks the same, but in the layers panel, you can actually see what is a basic appearance and what is a complex appearance. If we look here, all of these things right here, they have these little circles next to them, and they're clear. They're open targets. So these are called appearance targets or targets in Illustrator, and they are specifically referring to the appearance of that particular object. Right here, all these targets down here, you can see are filled in. They've got shading in them. And that's telling you that these are complex appearances. So we can see here are basic appearances, clear targets. Here are complex appearances, shaded targets. And the reason I point this out is just because, one of the things I teach even to more advanced graphic designers who work with a lot of stock art and that sort of thing. It's like when you open up a file and you have something going on that you don't quite understand, maybe because you got it from another artist, it's helpful to use the layers panel and the appearance panel to kind of see what is actually going on with that object. And so just knowing, when I see this here, I'm like, oh, all I really kind of need to know is just look over here and say, oh, yes, something's up with this appearance. Maybe there's a couple of fills stacked up. Maybe there's transparency applied to this object. Maybe there's a brush stroke on it and that sort of thing. So it can give you a quick way of looking at this in the appearance panel, just to kind of know what's up. The other thing about these targets here is that they are good for, you can actually, and I don't use them this way as much, but you can use them to move appearances to other objects. So like I can take this appearance right here. Which object is that? This is the object. Okay. I can take that appearance and drag it here and replace the pattern fill with that, formerly with that blue and green fill and stroke. I'm going to undo that. So that's really what these targets are for. And if we were getting into something deeper like group appearances and layer appearances, then it's important to be able to work with these targets. Because, for example, a layer appearance, here's a layer, and we're not going to get into this because can be really advanced stuff here, but just being able to affect the appearance of this whole layer here is something you have to click on this target, then go over into the layers panel. Now we see there's a layer appearance here, and I can start adding effects and stuff to it like that, which means that everything I draw on this layer could potentially have that same drop shadow on it. That's a usage of layer appearances. But that's why we have these targets here. So, as we've talked about before, there's this little blank space here that allows us to select the object and maybe take this object and move it up to another layer, like I just did there by dragging that little dot. I'm going to undo that. You can also drag appearances to apply them to other objects. All right. So that's kind of a little bit about how appearance relates to the layers panel and, the difference between complex and basic appearances. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this basic lesson on the appearance panel. This is one of the Zoom replays that's available to anyone in my membership. And if you want to find out more about it, you can visit my website at lauracoylecreative.com, where I teach Adobe Illustrator through my self-paced courses, live Zoom meetings, and my community. My name is Laura Coyle, and thank you for watching.